And so we've got a lot to boast about in Ohio. And one of the things that we can boast about is that John Glenn is a Buckeye. This man grew up in a small town in southeastern Ohio, went to Muskingum College, a small college, became a fighter pilot in the Korean War. Following that, he became an astronaut, orbited the Earth, went into business, became a very successful businessman, became a United States Senator, served Ohio for so many years as a United States Senator, and then he became an astronaut again. And even today, John Glenn is working tirelessly for the benefit of this state, and he is especially interested in young people and what we can do to make sure that our young citizens are superbly educated and given every opportunity to achieve their dreams as he was able to achieve his. So I present to you America's and Ohio's hero, John Glenn.
Democratic Party, we always try and have good balance. And so I'm the token old fud here. But we do have people at both ends of the scale. And obviously we need to bring young leadership like John and Tim here and so on. One of the people who's on my staff and now on your staff, Ron Grimes there in Washington, tells me privately very highly good things about you. So it's great. I thought maybe he might be traveling with you today. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I used to live down the road on the river down here until I got elected to the Senate back many years ago. And just didn't pay to keep the house in, so we finally sold it and moved into an apartment down at Summit Chase down the road a ways. And so we've seen such terrific changes in this particular area. We used to come out here and do our shopping, grocery shopping, some and so on here. And the area here has expanded, but good, in a good way. And I think it's been largely due to your efforts here in the chamber and the type organization, the type of thing that you supported here in Dublin, this area. We were out here a few weeks ago. We had the big rally for Obama out at the high school here. What a day that was. We had about 19,000 people that the police estimated out there, I believe. It was a terrific program that day. But, and he touched on a lot of the things that are the major issues in the campaign. To inject one little political note here, I have, many of my Republican friends, I talk to them about where we've gone with this, and I find just as much disenchantment on the Republican side as there is on the Democratic side this time. But the direction the country has gone in the last 8 years, we've seen a whole bunch of things we don't like, and I don't care whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, we just don't like them. And I've sort of summarized them before some audiences, as though I think the things the Republican Party has stood for through the years got trampled pretty much over the last few years. And let me give an example. The Republican Party that I knew growing up was a party that stood for low expenditures, keep it down, keep the government expenditures down, low debt, didn't want to let the debt get too big, little foreign involvement. Those were sort of mantras of the Republican Party. Now look what's happened in this. We have by far the biggest debt. We're going by almost $10 trillion now. When it started out 8 years ago, it was about 5.4 in debt. And I think this coming year, the next budget is about, what, $500 billion, I think, out of whack. And foreign involvement, I think we'd all agree, while we could argue all day over the rightness and wrongness of the war, I think one part of that war that I supported 100% was going into Afghanistan. When I was still in the Senate, I was on the Special Committee on Intelligence, and we had all the reports of what the training was going in Afghanistan, the military training for terrorist activity. Didn't know where it was going to hit, but we had all that information there that they were training to do something, and so we followed that very, very closely. Well, that part of it, I think Americans were united in supporting. Going into Iraq was a little different thing. That's where we use some pretty tortured logic in justifying what's happened in there. So it's been a very difficult time period for this country. And I think this time in this election is a time period when we have a chance to straighten that out. John McCain's a good friend of mine. He and I traveled together when I was in the Senate on some trips to the Far East, looking at the POW and MIA matters there. And so I know John very, very well. But I think John's policies of, I think most of you would probably agree, on the increasing more tax benefits for the wealthy and use the trickle-down theory we've talked about in the past is just not the way this country is going to get back on its feet again. And this is a tragedy right now with the economic situation in which we find ourselves. Now, let me switch a minute. The governor mentioned his emphasis on education. If there's one thing that I think is going to bring Ohio back and make Ohio a leader among all states in this nation, it's going to be these programs that the governor has put in, and we need to back, and we need to expand in the area of education. And not only higher education. We're pretty well ahead of most other nations around the world in higher education. Hope we can keep that lead. It's not guaranteed. You know, one of the people from Ohio State back about 3 years ago now was on a trip out to China to talk to their educators out there, part of a group. And they were told that China in the next 10 years wants to establish 100 new universities. Bang, 100. Just like that. And they'll do it because they can allocate the money to do it. And that was scaling down their plans. They had originally thought they'd try to do 200. And so that's what we're up against in higher education. We still have a lead in this country, a good lead, and people send their kids from all over the world to get a good education in this country. But the area where we're getting behind and getting further behind, not necessarily here in Dublin, but on average across this country, that must be corrected, is the area of K-12 education, and particularly in the area of science and math and technology. We had a study some years ago that I was involved with, which showed that our kids across this country here in science, technology, and math are up to about the 4th grade. Their understanding of these things is in the top 2 or 3 nations in the 41 nations that were studied over a 3-year period. Our kids rate very well there. From there on until they get out of high school, the average across country is that our kids drop to 2 or 3 from the bottom. Some of the only countries behind us are South Africa and forget where the other one is. But anyway, there are a couple of, we drop off the scope in international competition. Now I say that because I think there are 2 things that led this country, and we could say that led Ohio in our times past also, that led our nation into preeminence in the world. And that is number 1. Education in this country wasn't just for the kids from the castle or the rich kids or the wealthy kids, it was for everybody. Particularly in those areas of science and math and technology that everyone understood. And so we wound up with a very educated workforce in this country. And then the second element was we put more into basic, fundamental research. We learned to do things first. And with that educated citizenry here, a little bit of investment, wow. We just created new jobs and businesses that just became the envy of the world, and the world copied our lead in these areas. And that was true of Ohio here in leading our states, and it was true of this nation in leading the world. And I think it's just as true today as it's ever been, that if we're going to lead the world in the future and determine our own future, and not be dependent on getting our jobs and employment by importing technology and new industries from other places, it's going to be because we got back to emphasizing those 2 things. I don't know what you probably have a better. You're what, superintendent?
Yes.
Okay, good. And I'm sure that I hope your district here is much better than the averages cross country, and I'm sure it is.
We're much better than the average.
Yeah. Well, good. Good. I'm all for that.